The sun was just starting to rise over Maple Grove, a quiet suburban neighborhood lined with neat lawns, tall oak trees, and rows of houses that all seemed to look the same. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other in the mornings and the mailman knew everyone by name. When Linda Parker moved there, people didn't know much about her. She came in a small moving truck, no family with her, just a cheerful golden retriever named Max and a few boxes of furniture. The neighbors saw her smiling, polite, and calm as she unloaded her things one by one. She was in her late 40s, soft-spoken, and carried herself with a peaceful confidence. Linda's house was at the end of the street, near a little walking trail that led to a park. She liked the quiet. After spending years working as a physical education teacher, she wanted a calm place to live, somewhere she could grow flowers and take morning walks with Max. In her first few weeks, she kept to herself. She waved at people, said hello, and offered a friendly smile whenever someone passed. She joined the neighborhood online group to stay informed and paid her HOA fees on time, just like everyone else. But in every neighborhood, there's always one person who takes things too seriously. At Maple Grove, that person was Rick Thompson. Rick had lived there for almost 10 years and saw himself as the neighborhood's guardian. He wasn't the official HOA president, but everyone knew he acted like he was. He was the kind of man who measured grass height, took photos of parked cars, and knocked on doors if someone's trash bin was left out too long. When he noticed a new resident moving in, his curiosity turned into obsession. He wanted to make sure everything followed the rules. A week after Linda settled in, Rick stopped by her house. He knocked firmly, clipboard in hand. "Good morning," Linda greeted with her usual soft smile. "Morning," Rick replied, glancing around her yard. "Just wanted to welcome you to Maple Grove. I'm the HOA representative for this block. We like to keep things orderly here." Linda nodded politely. "That sounds nice. I appreciate the visit." He looked over her shoulder at the porch. "Just so you know, the HOA doesn't allow wind chimes or garden decorations taller than 2 feet. Also, front doors should be neutral colors only. Yours is fine for now, but if you ever decide to repaint, check the approved color list." Linda smiled again. "Thank you, I'll keep that in mind." Rick didn't smile back. He just made a note on his clipboard and left. That was the beginning. In the days that followed, Linda noticed Rick walking past her house more than usual. Sometimes he stopped, took pictures of her mailbox, or stared at her flower beds for a long time before walking off. It was odd, but she didn't think much of it. Maybe he just cared a little too much about neighborhood rules. Then came the first note. It was left on her door one morning. "Your flower colors are not compliant with community standards. Please remove or replace with neutral tones within 7 days." Linda read it twice, then looked at her garden. She had planted marigolds and petunias, bright yellows and purples that brought life to the yard. They looked cheerful, not offensive. Still, she didn't want trouble, so she trimmed them back and left only a few. When Rick walked by later that week, he nodded slightly. "Glad to see you're following the guidelines," he said. Linda only smiled and said, "No problem," but it didn't stop there. Next came complaints about her mailbox being an inch too close to the curb. Then about her dog's leash being too long. Then a message saying her garden hose was visible from the street. Each time, Linda quietly fixed the issue. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She simply wanted peace. The neighbors started to notice. A few whispered things like, "That poor woman, he's picking on her," or "Rick needs to mind his own business." But no one ever stepped in. Linda continued to go about her days. Every morning she walked Max, waved at whoever passed, and spent afternoons tending her garden. She seemed calm and unbothered, though deep down she wondered why Rick was so determined to make her life difficult. One Saturday morning, she was in her front yard trimming the hedges when Rick came marching up again, holding his clipboard as usual. "Morning," she said gently, wiping her hands on her gardening gloves. He didn't return the greeting. "You're using an unapproved lawn edging. The HOA requires brick or stone, not plastic." Linda glanced at the neat border she had installed herself. "I wasn't aware of that rule. I can replace it if needed." Rick sighed loudly, like he was dealing with a major crime. "Please do. I'll check back next week." He turned to leave, then stopped and added, "We have standards here, you know. It's what keeps this place beautiful." Linda nodded once. "Of course." After he left, she looked down at the border and chuckled softly to herself. She wasn't laughing out of amusement, more like disbelief. In her years of teaching, she had dealt with stubborn kids, angry parents, even full-blown arguments on the field. But this man, this self-declared rule enforcer, was something else. Still, she chose patience. That evening, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset while Max lay beside her. The air was calm, filled with the distant sound of crickets. She thought about the life she had wanted, simple, peaceful, free from stress. That's why she had moved here. She reminded herself that people like Rick often needed control because they lacked peace in their own hearts. Arguing with him wouldn't fix that. Inside her living room, on a shelf, sat a framed photo of her younger self wearing a white karate gi and a black belt tied neatly around her waist. It was from years ago during a championship she had won quietly and proudly. She hadn't practiced in a while, but the discipline never left her. Karate had taught her something she still lived by. Strength isn't about fighting. It's about control of the mind, the body, and the heart. She took another sip of tea and smiled. Tomorrow would be another day. And if Rick came back with another rule or complaint, she'd handle it the same way, calmly, respectfully, and without losing her peace. She didn't know it yet. But this quiet patience of hers would one day be tested in a way that would shock the entire neighborhood. It had been almost 2 months since Linda moved into Maple Grove. The days were peaceful for her, but there was always that small shadow of stress whenever she saw Rick's tall figure walking by with his clipboard. She told herself not to take it personally. Maybe he was just trying to do his job. Maybe that was his way of feeling useful. Still, there was no denying how uncomfortable it was to always feel watched. One Thursday afternoon, Linda was outside watering her small front garden when she heard someone clear their throat behind her. She turned and saw Rick again, standing at the edge of her driveway, his eyes scanning her yard like he was inspecting a construction site. "Good afternoon," she said kindly. He didn't return the greeting. "You know the HOA has rules about decorative stones?" he asked. Linda looked down at the few smooth white stones she had placed around her flower bed. "I didn't, but I can check. They're not approved. Only tan or gray stones are allowed," he said, writing something on his clipboard. "And also your garbage bins are visible from the street. You'll need to move them behind the fence." She nodded slowly. "All right. I'll take care of it today." Rick gave a short nod. "Please do." Then he turned and walked away without another word. Linda stood there for a moment, the hose still running in her hand. Max, her golden retriever, wagged his tail beside her. Completely unaware of the tension, she sighed softly and shut off the water. That night, she replaced the white stones with tan ones, even though she liked the originals better. She moved her garbage bins and double-checked every little thing outside her home. She didn't want trouble, but the next morning, another note was on her door. It said, "Your mailbox is slightly leaning forward. Please correct this immediately." Linda stared at it for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Slightly leaning forward," she whispered to herself. "Really?" She took her tools, adjusted the post, and checked it with a level. Perfectly straight. As the days went on, the pattern continued. Every few days, Rick found something new to complain about. A crack in her driveway, a garden hose left in view, a small birdhouse that apparently wasn't allowed. It was exhausting. Yet Linda never raised her voice. She never argued. She handled every situation with patience, though inside she was growing tired. One evening, she invited her next-door neighbor, a kind older woman named Betty, to sit with her on the porch. Betty had lived in Maple Grove for over 15 years and had seen plenty of HOA drama. "Rick's at it again, isn't he?" Betty said as she settled into the chair beside her. Linda gave a small laugh. "You noticed?" "Oh, honey, everyone has. He's been doing this for years. He once fined a family because their Christmas lights were too bright." Linda shook her head. "That must have been frustrating." It was. "Most people just ignore him now. But he doesn't like that. He wants control," Betty said, sipping her tea. "I'm surprised you've stayed so calm." Linda smiled gently. "I've dealt with worse. Some people just want attention. If I don't give it, maybe he'll stop." Betty nodded slowly. "Maybe, but be careful, dear. Sometimes when people like him don't get what they want, they push harder." Linda didn't think much of that at the time. She believed in staying calm and kind. She believed people eventually came around if you treated them with respect. But Betty's words would soon prove true. The following week, Rick's visits became more frequent. He started showing up at random times, morning, afternoon, even early evening, walking around her property and writing things down. Once, Linda came outside and found him taking pictures of her fence. "Rick," she said in her calm voice, "is something wrong?" He didn't look up from his camera, just documenting a potential violation. "What violation?" "The paint color on your fence doesn't match the approved palette." Linda blinked in surprise. "This fence came with the house. I haven't painted it," he shrugged. "Still needs to be corrected." She took a slow breath, reminding herself to stay patient. "All right, I'll look into it." That seemed to irritate him. Maybe he wanted her to argue. Maybe he was waiting for her to lose her composure so he could say she was being difficult. But she didn't. She just stood there, steady and calm as he took a few more photos and left. After he was gone, Linda sat on her porch steps with Max resting his head on her knee. She looked at the sunset, the orange sky glowing softly through the trees. She tried to let go of the frustration, but deep down, she was starting to feel something she hadn't felt in years. That quiet stirring inside that reminded her she didn't have to accept unfairness forever. That night, she lay in bed thinking about all the lessons her karate instructor used to tell her. One in particular came to mind. Patience is power, but power isn't weakness. The next morning, she woke early, feeling clear-headed. She cleaned her front yard, fixed a few minor things, and went on with her day. She wouldn't let Rick's actions steal her peace. Still, it was hard not to notice how he treated her differently from others. Across the street, one neighbor had a basketball hoop in the driveway, a clear HOA violation, but Rick never said a word. Another had a bright blue shed that didn't match any approved colors. Nothing happened there either. Linda began to realize it wasn't about rules. It was about control. He wanted to remind her that she was new, and he was in charge. Later that week, as she walked Max down the street, she heard a whisper between two residents sitting on their porch. "That poor lady," one said quietly. "Rick's been on her case since day one." "I know," the other replied. "She's too nice to stand up to him." Linda smiled faintly as she passed by. Too nice, and maybe that was true. But niceness didn't mean weakness. She believed kindness could be stronger than anger. When she got home, she found yet another note taped to her door. This one said, "You have 7 days to repaint your fence or face an HOA fine." She took it off, folded it neatly, and set it on her kitchen counter. Then she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The same calmness she had always carried still filled her. But now, beneath it, there was something new. Quiet strength waiting for the right time to show itself. Rick didn't know it yet, but his constant pushing was waking up a side of Linda that most people had never seen, and that side was patient, but not endlessly so. The next few days went by quietly, but something in the air felt different. Linda could feel it every time she stepped outside, that uneasy awareness that someone was watching. She tried to go about her daily routine. Every morning she took Max for a walk, waved to the same neighbors, and tended to her small garden before the sun got too hot. But lately, the peace she once enjoyed in those moments felt thinner, more fragile. Rick's notes had stopped for a few days, and that almost felt stranger than the notes themselves. She wondered if maybe he had finally grown tired of bothering her. Maybe Betty was right. Maybe he had finally realized his behavior was too much. But that small hope didn't last long. It was Saturday morning. When the next problem appeared, literally Linda was just getting back from the park with Max when she saw Rick standing near her driveway again. This time he wasn't just taking notes or photos. He was pacing, clearly angry about something. She tried to stay calm as always. "Good morning," she said gently. Rick didn't answer right away. He pointed toward her recycling bins instead. "You left those out past pickup time," he said sharply. Linda blinked. "It's only been an hour. I was out walking the dog." He crossed his arms. "Doesn't matter. HOA rules say bins must be stored immediately after pickup. It's about keeping the neighborhood tidy." She nodded patiently. "All right, I'll move them right now." She walked over and began rolling the bins behind the side gate. But when she turned back, Rick was still standing there, shaking his head. "Some people just don't respect community standards, and he muttered loud enough for her to hear. Linda felt her heart rate rise slightly, but she took a slow breath. "I'm doing my best to follow every rule you've given me," she said quietly. Rick gave a cold smile. "Well, maybe your best isn't good enough." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Rick turned and walked away, leaving Linda standing in her driveway with a strange heaviness in her chest. That night, she told herself to let it go. She made a warm dinner, played soft music, and read a book until she felt her mind relax. But the next morning, things took a turn she hadn't expected. When she stepped outside to get her mail, she noticed something taped to her front door again. A bright yellow slip of paper marked HOA violation notice. She sighed softly, pulled it down, and read the list. Non-standard fence color, still not corrected. Unauthorized decorative stones, not verified. Improper bin storage, repeated offense. Fine to be issued if not resolved within 5 days. Linda stood there in disbelief. She had already fixed most of those things. She even had photos to prove it. This time, she decided to speak up, not in anger but with clarity. That afternoon, she walked to the HOA office at the end of the street, a small beige building near the community park. She found Rick inside, sitting at the front desk, typing something on a computer. "Rick," she said calmly as she entered. He looked up, surprised. "Oh, hello, Linda. I came to ask about this notice," and she handed him the paper. "Most of these things are already corrected. I even have photos." He looked at the paper and then at her. "If the rules weren't followed properly, the system automatically sends a notice." Linda tilted her head slightly. "Automatically? You hand-delivered it." Rick's face tightened. "I was just doing my job." She nodded slowly. "I understand. But maybe there's been a mistake." "I've done everything you asked." He shrugged. "We'll review it." There was something about the way he said it, cold, dismissive, that made Linda realize he wasn't interested in fairness. He wanted control. She thanked him and left without another word. Later that day, when she returned home, a few of her neighbors waved from across the street. One of them, a middle-aged man named Tom, walked over. "I saw what happened this morning," he said quietly. "Rick was yelling near your driveway." Linda frowned. He wasn't exactly yelling, but he wasn't happy either. Tom shook his head. "He's been like that with people before, but never this bad. You're handling it better than most would." "I'm trying," Linda said softly. Tom gave her a kind smile. "Well, just know people are noticing. You're not alone." His words warmed her heart more than she expected. It reminded her that kindness still existed in the small cracks of an unpleasant situation. That evening, as the sky turned golden, Linda sat on her porch again, sipping tea and watching the light fade. She thought about everything that had happened since she moved to Maple Grove, the notes, the complaints, the cold stares. She could feel that the situation was building toward something. She didn't know what, but she could sense it. When she closed her eyes, she remembered her old karate instructor's voice again, calm and steady. "Control your mind and the world cannot control you." The next morning, the breaking point came. Linda was unloading groceries from her car when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Rick again, walking up fast. His expression was tight, his tone sharp. "Linda, I told you about the bins," he said loudly, pointing toward the side of her house. "They're behind the gate," she replied, confused. "Not completely. I could still see them from the sidewalk." She set her grocery bag down carefully. "Rick, I understand you care about the rules, but this is getting excessive." "I've done everything you've asked." He stepped closer. "Excessive? No, I'm maintaining order. People need to follow rules here or this whole neighborhood will fall apart." "Rick," she said softly but firmly now, "I'm not your enemy." He frowned. "You're not following directions. That's the problem." The sound of a screen door opening came from across the street. A few neighbors had come outside, sensing the tension. They didn't say anything, just watched quietly. Linda noticed them too. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her and Rick. She looked back at him. "Let's not do this here," she said gently. But he didn't move. He just stood there, breathing hard, his face red with frustration. For a moment, everything felt still, the air, the sound, even time itself. Then slowly, Linda picked up her grocery bag and said, "I think it's best we both take a step back." She turned and walked toward her front door, her voice calm, her movements steady. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to fight. Her strength was in her control. Rick stood there for a moment, looking confused and almost small. He didn't have a response this time. As Linda closed her door behind her, the watching neighbors quietly went back inside, each of them carrying their own thoughts about what they had just seen. Linda placed her grow. Something told her this wasn't over yet, but she also knew she was ready for whatever came next, because real strength didn't come from anger. It came from peace that couldn't be shaken. The next few days passed with a strange quiet. Rick didn't come by. No new notes appeared on Linda's door. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood felt calm again. Linda didn't know whether to feel relieved or cautious. Sometimes silence didn't mean peace. It just meant a storm was waiting to return. Still, she tried to enjoy the calm while it lasted. She worked in her garden, baked cookies for a few neighbors, and even took a long walk to the park without looking over her shoulder. For a short while, Maple Grove felt like the place she had always hoped it would be. Peaceful, friendly, and ordinary. But peace never lasted long when Rick was around. On Wednesday afternoon, Linda was returning from the grocery store. The sky was soft and blue, and Max was trotting happily beside her. As she turned onto her street, she noticed Rick standing at the end of her driveway again. His arms were crossed, his clipboard tucked under one arm. Her heart sank a little, but she reminded herself, "Stay calm, stay kind." "Afternoon," she said politely, locking her car. Rick didn't smile. "You got another warning," he said. "The board voted on it this morning." Linda frowned slightly. "Another warning? For what?" He held up a piece of paper. "Your mailbox paint is fading. It doesn't meet HOA standards." She looked at the mailbox, clean, solid, only a little weathered from the sun. "It's in good condition," she said gently. "Maybe to you," he snapped. "But not to the HOA." Linda nodded slowly. "All right, I'll repaint it this weekend." Rick's expression didn't soften. He stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to find something wrong in the way she spoke or stood. When he didn't find anything, he said, "Just make sure you do it. I'll check Monday." Then he turned and walked off, muttering under his breath. Linda stood still for a moment, the paper in her hand fluttering in the breeze. She didn't feel angry, just tired. Tired of the constant rules, the petty notes, the feeling of being watched. Later that evening, as the sun was setting, she sat on her porch again with a cup of tea. Betty came by carrying a small basket of fresh muffins. "You look like you could use something sweet," Betty said with a kind smile. Linda chuckled softly. "You're a mind reader." They sat together for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of sprinklers. "I heard Rick's been bothering you again," Betty said quietly. Linda nodded. "Another warning. This time about my mailbox." Betty shook her head. "That man needs a hobby," Linda smiled. "I think this is his hobby." They both laughed softly, but there was a sadness behind it. The kind that comes when something small and unnecessary keeps stealing your peace. After Betty left, Linda stayed outside a little longer. She thought about all the small moments Rick had ruined since she moved here. Not because he hated her, but because he seemed to enjoy control more than kindness. She thought about how, all this time, she had stayed calm. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew losing her temper wouldn't help. But now she felt something shift inside. Not anger, something quieter, stronger. She was done letting fear or frustration take her peace away. The next day, the weather was beautiful. Linda decided to repaint her mailbox right away, even though she had planned to wait for the weekend. She put on an old t-shirt, tied her hair back, and began working in the front yard. As she painted, several neighbors walked by and waved. A few stopped to chat. One man said, "Looks great, Linda. You're handling all this with so much grace." She smiled. "Thank you. It's just paint." He shook his head. "No, I mean everything. You've been patient with Rick when most of us wouldn't have been." She laughed softly. Patience is easier when you've had years of practice. By the afternoon, the mailbox looked brand new, a soft gray that matched the HOA's approved palette perfectly. She felt proud of her work and even took a picture of it. Just in case she needed proof later, as she was cleaning up, she saw Rick again, walking down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand. Like always, he stopped when he saw the freshly painted mailbox. "Well," he said slowly. At least you followed through. Linda smiled faintly. I said I would. Rick stepped closer, looking the mailbox up and down. He murmured. The shade looks a little lighter than the approved one. Did you use the exact color listed in the handbook? Linda set her paintbrush down and looked at him steadily. Yes, Rick, I did. He hesitated, perhaps sensing something different in her tone. Calm as always, but firmer now. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he just nodded slightly and walked away. That evening, as the sky turned orange and pink, Linda received a message from the HOA office in her email. It said her recent warning had been cleared. No fines, no further action. She felt a wave of relief, and small but satisfying. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to settle, but the calm didn't last long. 3 days later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Linda was in her driveway unloading a few potted plants when she heard Rick's voice again, sharper than usual. Linda. I told you last week about your bins. She turned slowly. They're behind the fence, she said, confused. They were visible earlier today. I drove by and saw them. Linda looked down the street, then back at him. Rick, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No, he said, his face red. You keep ignoring the rules. You think you can do whatever you want just because you're new here. She could feel the eyes of a few neighbors on them again. People were starting to come outside, pretending to check their mail or sweep their porches, but really just watching. Linda took a slow breath, steady as ever. I've followed every rule you've given me, she said quietly. You're the one who keeps changing them. For a second, Rick looked like he didn't know what to say. The calm in her voice seemed to throw him off. One of the neighbors across the street called out, She's right, Rick, leave her alone already. Rick glanced around, realizing people were watching. His face flushed, and for once he didn't have a quick reply. Linda didn't move closer. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, I'm not here to fight with you, but I won't keep living in fear of every small rule. I've done my part. Then she turned back toward her house, her steps slow and peaceful, as if nothing had happened at all. Rick stood there silent, his clipboard hanging loosely in his hand. The neighbors who had gathered nearby exchanged quiet looks, some surprised, some proud. Linda disappeared inside her house, closing the door gently behind her. Inside, she let out a long breath. Max wagged his tail and brushed against her leg, sensing her relief. She smiled and patted his head. For the first time since she'd moved to Maple Grove, she felt something shift, not in the neighborhood, but inside herself. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even tired anymore. She was just done letting someone else control her peace. And though she didn't know it yet, that calm strength, the same quiet confidence she had carried all her life, was about to change everything around her. The morning after the argument, Maple Grove felt different. The air seemed lighter somehow. The usual tension that lingered when Rick walked down the street wasn't there anymore. Linda didn't expect anything to change overnight, but she noticed the difference the moment she stepped outside with Max. Neighbors who usually just nodded now waved warmly. A few even stopped to talk. Good morning, Linda, one said. You really handled yourself well yesterday. She smiled politely. Thank you. I just want everyone to live peacefully. It wasn't about pride for her. She hadn't wanted to embarrass Rick or prove anything. She simply didn't want to live under constant pressure. And it seemed her calm strength had quietly encouraged others to stop being afraid too. Later that afternoon, as she was watering her garden, Betty walked over carrying a folded piece of paper. You won't believe this, Betty said. Handing it to her, Linda unfolded the paper. It was an HOA meeting announcement, scheduled for the weekend. At the top in bold letters it read, Community Discussion, HOA Conduct and Fair Treatment. People finally had enough, Betty said with a grin. They've been talking all morning. Looks like you gave everyone courage to speak up. Linda blinked in surprise. I didn't mean to start anything. Betty chuckled. You didn't start trouble, dear. You inspired change. That night, Linda thought about the meeting. She wasn't sure if she would go. She wasn't one for public arguments or drama, but she also knew that staying silent too long could sometimes let unfairness grow. When Saturday came, she decided to attend. The meeting was held in the small community center near the park. Dozens of residents filled the chairs, whispering quietly to each other. Rick sat at the front with two other HOA board members, looking stiff and serious. Linda found a seat near the middle and listened. The board began by reviewing regular topics: fees, maintenance, landscaping. Then a woman in the back raised her hand. "I'd like to talk about how residents are being treated," she said firmly. "Some of us are tired of being written up for small things that don't matter." A few people nodded. Another man spoke up. "We all know what this is about. It's about the way Rick has been using his authority. People shouldn't feel afraid to live in their own homes." Rick shifted in his chair. "I've only ever followed the rules set by the HOA," he said. "If people think they're unfair, they can take it up with the board." Someone else added, "We did." "Rick, you are the board." There was a soft murmur around the room. Linda sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. She wasn't there to attack anyone, just to listen. But then one of the board members turned to her. "Linda, you're new here," the woman said kindly. "Would you like to share your experience?" For a moment, Linda hesitated. She didn't like the spotlight. But then she looked around, at the neighbors who had smiled at her that morning, the people who now felt brave enough to speak up. She took a slow breath and stood. "I moved here because I wanted peace," she said softly. "I love this neighborhood. The trees, the quiet mornings, the sense of community, but lately it's been difficult to feel comfortable in my own home." The room was silent. "I've received more notices and warnings than I can count," she continued. "And every time I tried to follow the rules. I fixed my garden, repainted my mailbox, even changed the color of my fence. Not because I wanted to argue, but because I respect this community." She paused, her voice calm and steady. "But respect has to go both ways. We can follow the rules and still treat each other with kindness. That's what a neighborhood should be." When she finished, the room was completely quiet for a few seconds. Then came soft clapping, which grew louder until almost everyone joined in. Rick sat motionless, staring down at the table. After the meeting, the board voted to form a new committee to oversee HOA conduct and communication. It wasn't a dramatic scene, just a simple decision that would slowly change everything. Rick didn't speak much after that. In the following weeks, he stepped down from his position, saying he wanted to focus on personal matters. No one said anything unkind. They just wished him well. For the first time since she had moved to Maple Grove, Linda felt completely at peace. She still kept her garden tidy, still paid her fees, still smiled at everyone she met. But now those smiles were returned with warmth. Genuine warmth, not polite distance. One day, Tom from across the street came over while she was planting new flowers. "You know," he said, "the neighborhood's been a lot better lately. Quieter, friendlier." Linda smiled. "That's good to hear." He nodded. "You had a lot to do with that." She shook her head. "All I did was stay calm." "Exactly," he said. "You showed everyone that calm doesn't mean weak." Later that week, Linda received a letter from the new HOA committee, thanking her for her patience and understanding during the transition. It made her smile, not because she needed recognition, but because it showed growth. People had learned something valuable together. As the weeks turned into months, life in Maple Grove found a new rhythm. The neighborhood gatherings returned. Families spent more time outside. Even the HOA, once seen as strict and cold, started to feel like part of the community again. And Linda? She continued to live just as she always had, quietly, kindly, with a steady strength that didn't need to shout. One sunny afternoon, she set up a small table at the community park with a sign that read, "Free Self-Defense and Confidence Class." A few neighbors walked over curiously. Betty was the first to laugh. "You never told us you could teach this." Linda smiled modestly. "I used to teach years ago. Thought I'd share a few lessons." Soon a small group gathered, parents, teenagers, even a few older residents. She showed them simple movements, gentle techniques to build confidence, and spoke about balance and calmness. "It's not about fighting," she told them. "It's about control over your body, your reactions, and your peace. When you have that, no one can take it from you." As she spoke, a soft breeze passed through the park, rustling the trees. The same neighborhood that once felt divided now felt connected again, peaceful, united, and strong. Later that evening, as the sun went down, Linda walked home with Max by her side. The lights from the houses glowed warmly, and laughter echoed faintly from a nearby porch. She looked around and smiled to herself. Maple Grove was finally the peaceful place she had hoped for. Not because everything was perfect, but because people had learned how to treat each other better. As she closed her front gate, she whispered to herself, "Peace is stronger than power." And in that quiet, golden moment, she knew she had found exactly what she came here for.